Mark Twain once said, if you don't like the weather in New England, just wait a few minutes. But that does not apply to the storms in horror writer Joe Hill's new book. Strange Weather is a collection of 4 stories which tell of photos, needles, wind, and bullets raining down, and taps into cultural issues like frequent mass shootings in the United States, which he's referred to as One Nation Under Glock. Hill has also written The Fireman, Heart-Shaped Box, and the Lock and Key comic books, which are being turned into a Hulu series. And Joe Hill joins me now. Joe, thanks for coming in.
Adam, thanks for having me on. I mean, I guess Jim was going to do this show, and then he saw my name on the guest list, and he's, oh my God, the show's going right down the toilet.
Well, I think
so
he got a little intimidated,
in.
and he wanted to pass it on to me. Do you know Jim, by the way? I mean, talking about him that way, it sounds like you do.
We've crossed paths.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so
that's why he was like, I'm going to feed Adam to him, instead of,
I am glad that I'm doing this instead of Jim, because one of the reasons that I totally love the first story in your book is that I think we're exactly the same age, and I feel like the piece completely captured the essence of what it felt like to come of age in the 1980s. Among other things, I was a sort of awkward adolescent. Being a teenager in the 80s, I had forgotten how different the world was, and I think you really managed to get at that in the piece. Was that something important to you?
You talk about how different it is. I have 3 boys, and when I grew up, we had a phone with a rotary dial in the house, and my oldest boy, who was younger then, saw a phone with a rotary dial, and he got really excited, and he said, I know how this works. And he dialed a number, and then he looked at me and said, where's the button to hit send? And I just...
everything was different.
It's to me, it's the life I lived, but to a different generation, it is now officially ancient history.
So the other thing that I found fascinating about the first story is the way that you, and I don't want to paraphrase incorrectly here, I felt like you anthropomorphized a common but very terrifying medical condition for horrific effects. Yeah, can you tell me anything about, and I don't want to spoil this so people don't go out and buy the book, but can you tell me anything about the creative process involved in how you got the idea for the piece and where you took it?
Right, so Snapshot, the first story, Strange Weather is a book of 4 short novels. Snapshot is the first story in the book. And it's about the friendship between a 13-year-old in 1988 and a much older woman named Shelley Bukes, who was suffering from senile dementia. And only everyone thinks it's Alzheimer's, but our hero comes to suspect it's actually the work of a man called the Phoenician, who has a camera, a Polaroid camera that can steal memories. But
not a Solaroid, right?
It's a Solaroid. Yeah. It's a Solaroid. I wrote it. One of the things we can do with fiction is we can take something terrible in real life and we can give it a face and we can address it head on. I have a friend who lost a loved one to Alzheimer's who read the story, and one of the things he said to me afterwards was he said, I always wanted to be able to beat Alzheimer's up. But there's no one to attack. There's nothing, and that the story was satisfying because I made Alzheimer's into condensed it into an actual person, someone we can hate and strike back against.
And the resolution, or one of the resolutions, I found very gratifying in that piece, but I won't say what it was. Your reference to real life and reconfiguring it in fiction, I wanted to ask you, in moments where the real world seems especially terrifying. And what I'm thinking of right now, I am also a parent like you. I'm thinking of the daily talk of possible nuclear war with North Korea. Right. When the real world seems scarier than usual, does it make your job easier or more difficult?
That's a good question, and I think maybe in some ways it does make the job a little bit. It's when reality is scarier than fiction. Probably it depresses the horror market a little bit. I wrote a story, the 4th story in Strange Weather, is about climate change. A very specific kind of climate change. Thunderclouds open up and begin raining nails instead of water. And it becomes this global crisis where, if you're out in the rain, you can be torn to shreds. And in it, I presented America overseen by a president who is addicted to Twitter and whose response to a global catastrophe is to shriek in all caps on social media and to threaten war with a distant nation who he thinks might be responsible for creating the crisis. And when I wrote it, I thought I was exaggerating the current conditions. and now you see the potential for conflict heating up between America and North Korea, and social media seems to actually be, lighting the fuse, to be throwing gasoline on the fire, and it's just amazing that this is the world we live in now.
I think of the stories that you wrote here. I mean, you call them short novels, you call them short stories. I think of them as novellas. Does this form give you possibilities that you don't have when you're writing either a classic novel or short stories?
Right. I mean, I think that horror fiction really lives at the length of the short novel, the story that's about 80 to 125 pages. And I'm thinking of books like The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, no relation. I'm thinking of Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I revere the work of Neil Gaiman, and his best book is called The Ocean at the End of the Lane.
That's a terrific book.
It's so scary and so satisfying and very direct, and there isn't a single wasted word in that whole book. It's about 185 pages long. So I think, when you have that short novel, you have a scary short novel, you have something that has the velocity of a short story, but the depth of characterization and the thematic complexity that you find in a novel, and that's the best of both worlds.
Unfortunately, we got to leave it there, but it's a pleasure to meet you, and I cannot wait to read the rest of the pieces in the new book.
I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for having me on. This was great.
Thank you. The book, again, is Strange Weather, 4 Short Novels. It's on sale on Tuesday.